about his relationship with Andrew Carnegie. They were very famous business partners. Those of you who are Pittsburghers may know Frick based on some of the things he left the city. If you work downtown or know Grant Street at all, there's actually a big strip of Grant Street that's entirely due to Frick. The Frick building, where I happen to work, next door to the Union Trust building, and next door to that, the William Penn Hotel, were all built by Henry Clay Frick. In addition, any of you who live on the East End are familiar with Frick Park, 600 acres of forest primarily, which were donated by Frick to the city, or actually by his daughter, as it turned out. Henry Clay Frick was born in 1849, and he died in 1919. He was born in West Overton, which is in Westmoreland County, and later became known as America's Most Hated Man, largely because of the event that we're celebrating tonight, or the cause of the event that we're celebrating tonight, that is the Homestead Steel Strike. So Henry Clay Frick grew up on a farm in West Overton. His father was described as unambitious and unimpressive, but young Henry Clay Frick was anything but. He very quickly got involved in business, largely through family interests in both the whiskey business and in the coal business. And as a young man at age 23, he made his fortune during the Panic of 1873 by buying up the shares of a bankrupt family business and then forcing his cousin out of it. So he was a rather tough guy from an early age. And by the time he was 30 years old, he was a millionaire. Something that he and Andrew Carnegie had in common was that they both took advantage of what was kind of a perfect storm of business opportunity in Pittsburgh at the time. Pittsburgh in 1875 produced 25% of the iron in the United States. 25 years later, in 1900, after a significant boom, which we're kind of telling the story here, Pittsburgh produced 50% of the iron in the United States and twice the output of England. And so, though these times were filled with labor strife and so forth, at times, I think here in Pittsburgh, we'd like to see that growth come back, since it's been rather dismal of late. A couple of things that were happening at the time that made Frick behave the way he did. There's Max Weber, some of you may be familiar with, was an influential writer of the late 1800s, and he wrote that people increasingly lived to work and didn't work to live. And some people think that Weber's writing elevated capitalism to the level of a religion. So it linked Protestantism with capitalism, and that they were joint virtues, and that justified a lot of behavior that, frankly, was not particularly Christian seeming. Another thing that happened at the time was Darwinism, where the survival of the fittest became a very influential idea, and both Frick and Carnegie used Darwinism as justification for some of the stuff that happened in the market, some of the things that they did in the market. Finally, there was the rise of modern business methods like cost accounting, where managers learned how to squeeze every penny out of the business, and they looked at labor as another factor in production. And so as it became easier to find cost savings, then labor kind of got under increasing scrutiny. Early on, Frick, when he owned some stuff in some coal mines and so forth, was a tough guy when it came to labor relations. He was known for having thrown a striking worker off an embankment when he found him camping out on company land. And he really distilled the labor cost-profit argument as a lifelong management hardliner. Frick did. Around 1880, Frick and Carnegie met. At the time, Frick was a vendor to Carnegie, and he sold coal to his Carnegie Steel Company. And Carnegie wanted to vertically integrate, so he engineered a deal with Frick where he became a controlling owner of Frick's business, and Frick took an interest in Carnegie's business. And about 6 years later, when Carnegie's brother died, Tom Carnegie, who had been running his business, Frick was anointed as the successor and became the general manager of the Carnegie Steel Company. So around the time, there was an increasing amount of labor unrest. In 1886, there were the Haymarket riots, and some of that spread to Carnegie's operations. And so there were increasing signs of worker dissatisfaction with the status quo in the steel business. And there were a couple of fairly confrontational labor disputes. In 1887, there was one that Carnegie, who was kind of ambivalent on these issues, he kind of played both sides. He liked to be nice to labor, and then he would also tell management to go and put the hammer down. In one of the instances, Frick quit because he felt Carnegie was being too soft on labor in 1887, but was brought back not long after that. And Frick's reputation was somewhat tarnished not long after in 1889 when he was part of the ownership of the club that created the dam that later broke and flooded Johnstown, killing almost 2,200 people. And you could argue that some of the stuff that Frick did in building the dam with shoddy workmanship contributed to that catastrophe. Anyway, that brings us to the early 1890s when there was a panic going on, a periodic recession, kind of like we have today, and management of Carnegie Steel, specifically Mr. Frick, felt that they should negotiate some wage concessions from their workers. There had been a couple prior strikes at the Homewood site that had kind of set the stage, and when the negotiations came about in 1892, Carnegie decamped for Scotland and left Frick with instructions to deal with the situation, which Frick proceeded to do. I won't go through the long and short of the Homestead strike, but the result was many dead people, the Pinkertons being called in a battle along the shores of the Monongahela in Homewood. Carnegie distanced himself from the Homewood strike as it was happening. Homestead, sorry. As it was happening, and that was the beginning of a significant rift between Frick and Carnegie, which lasted the rest of their lives. They remained business partners for a couple of years, but then eventually Carnegie and Frick parted ways, and Frick went and struck out independently. At the time, it was quoted in the papers, "Say what you will of Frick, he was a brave man. Say what you will of Carnegie, he was a coward." That is, Frick was not, he was not two-faced about his positions. He was pretty staunchly anti-labor and made no bones about it his entire life. Carnegie tried to play both sides, as I mentioned before, and I think suffered a little bit as a result in the perspective of historians. A final little irony that I'll mention here, not a well-known fact, but I actually have it on good authority that the great-granddaughter of Henry Clay Frick actually married the great-grandson of Mr. Berkman. Though it didn't last, they were divorced. But I thought that was a nice little tidbit that I could end with. Anyway, thank you for listening. And,
next up is Gary Huck. Before he gets up, though, I just wanted to say that as a kid, I was totally thrilled with political cartoons and Thomas Nast. And it's interesting to finally meet a person that I've seen their political cartoons. And he has some, I guess, some help in his presentation. So without further ado, Gary Huck on up.
I am Gary Huck. I'm the only full-time political cartoonist employed by the labor union in North America. I work for the Independent League here in Pittsburgh. Originally, Stephen had asked Tavia LaFollette, who I'm married to join us here tonight, but she's working with Bread and Puppet in Vermont. But I did bring one of her sculptures, so please, before you leave, take a look at it. And we changed the name for this evening. It's now called Enrique Frick Dines with a Worker. And please enjoy it. And this is going to be part of an exhibit called Workplace Funnies that's going to be downtown at 820 Liberty Avenue for the entire month of September.
Right.
Yes.
So please come see the exhibit. It has, I forgot how many political cartoons, but four Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonists. They're all cartoons dealing with the economy and the nature of work. And it's going to be a very good exhibit. Oddly enough, I've had a show of cartoons in this very building. When the UE moved here from New York City, our archives, which is a much longer story, the archives for United Electrical Workers is here in Pittsburgh. So when we moved here from New York, we donated all of Fred Wright's cartoons. Fred Wright is a cartoonist that I followed in the UE. And Fred was an amazing cartoonist and defined what labor art is for lots and lots of people in America. And so the University of Pittsburgh decided to have an exhibit here in this building. And a lover of sweet irony, we were more than happy to do it. So we filled this building with left-wing, progressive political cartoons. And it was amazing. And so the night we were going to open, we come in, and the curator, who's no longer here, he was fired. Whether it was a result of this exhibit, I don't know, but he took me outside, and as you come in the front of the building, there's a relief sculpture of Frick, and somebody had thrown toilet paper on it. And he wanted to know if I did it. And I thought he must be kidding, but he wasn't. So he wanted to know if I defaced Frick. And of course, at the time I didn't, but tonight I will. When you go into the Carnegie Museum, you see this portrait of Carnegie by Andy Warhol. And so I thought, what better way to celebrate this event would be to dedicate a portrait of Frick here tonight. So I spent 20 minutes hard at work, and I'm sure Warhol didn't spend that much more time on his portrait. And this is pop art, so you have the relief sculpture, and you have some other Frick's art, but there's no pop art comparable to what Warhol did, and now there is. And in keeping with the piece, I added the tribute to Berkman and his great aim. So this is my portrait of Enrique. And Stephen, this is for you.
Oh,
wow! Goes over the mail.
And as all good cartoonists, I am brief. Thank you.
Our last speaker is a friend of mine, and checkered past isn't quite the right word, but Mel Packer's been around the block, and it's very interesting. He's going to talk about his, he delivered steel, and he's been involved in labor, and I feel it's an honor for him to get up and tell us about his experiences. Come on up, Mel.
Steve asked me, for whatever reason, to talk about being a union steward, talk about being in the union. Steward's known as a rep or a griever in some unions, but it's the person who represents your workmates, some or all of your workmates. But the truth is, I was only an elected steward for a brief period of time. That was at the medical supply warehouse I helped organize in 1969 when I got to Local 249. I went on to become a truck driver, and my last job was in Local 800. I was a Teamster steel hauler running about 12 states. until about 82 when I took a withdrawal card from the union. I went and retrained into the medical field. During that job, I did function as a steward to some degree, but I wasn't elected. I simply did what the official steward was supposed to do, but he was a company suck. Despite the efforts of the Teamster Union hierarchy and the company, I did function that way. The end result of that was rather confusing because steel hauling, even under a union contract, is confusing in and of itself, along with the rights of members, which are seldom enforced and very confusing even with the contract. But to make a long story short, I was called in from the road one day, I think I was in Detroit, and I was empty. So they dragged me in an empty truck, and in front of witnesses in the office, the boss said, I have to get rid of you. You're teaching people how to file grievances. I've tried everything I can think of to dump you, but you're not making any mistakes, so I'm laying you off. If you've been in the union and you're going to be an activist, you can't make mistakes. You cover your butt all the time, and I had. I pointed out to him there were 30 people below me on the seniority list out of about 100 drivers, and he couldn't lay me off out of seniority. So in front of witnesses, about 6 of them in the office, he ordered his secretary to bring home every driver below me on the list, no matter where they were, empty or loaded, and to inform them that they were laid off just as well because he had to get rid of them. He did, however, offer all the new jobs with a non-union company he had set up doing the same work, hauling the same loads out of the same mills. Needless to say, this met with the opposition from the union. They didn't really care. They didn't like steel haulers. They didn't like me. Some drivers didn't take his offer, and others did out of financial necessity. Many years later, with no help from the union, we won a fairly large back pay settlement through the National Labor Relations Act for numerous drivers. But despite his public violation of every aspect of the National Labor Relations Act and the union contract, he ultimately won. Frankly, I knew that was going to happen because steel haulers are generally not a group that finds unity or working together a necessary working style. The work is isolating, it's lonely, it's long, and it's hard. Has a tendency to attract those who need to be away from others, and especially away from bosses. And so that type of driver often sees him or herself as a modern reincarnation of the cowboy out there in the range rounding up the strays. So I'm going to talk to you about unions for a bit. What they are, why we form them, why do we belong to them. The definition of union we're going to use is, quote, an organized association of workers formed to protect and further their rights and interests. And many people ask in this era of little union membership, at least in this nation, to protect us from whom? Well, we live in a system called capitalism. The job of capital is to collect more capital. And what is capital? Capital is, quote, wealth in the form of money or other assets owned by a person or organization. And that system which allows you to collect it is again called capitalism. And the name itself defines what it is and what it does. It is about, and is only about, collecting capital. That collection is not done by asking for donations, but by making a profit off the sale of products or services produced by workers, whether they're musicians, whether they put plaster on a wall, computer software engineers, medical engineers, or industrial workers. It's called capitalism because the collection of capital is truly the only thing it is about. Make no mistake. It's not about doing good, as some capitalists claim, or it might be called goodism. It's not about providing good health care, decent housing, or working or living environments. Or we might call it helpism or fairism or some other bullshit phrase. It's not about sharing the wealth collected, or we might call it something like equalism. We might even call it socialism. It's simply about collecting capital by any means necessary. It doesn't matter if people die, if they get cancer, if your kids don't eat, but have to play on toxic dumps. It doesn't matter if fingers are lost, if people have to eat from dumpsters, or if they make money by sending us off to unjust wars so they can increase their profits. Nothing matters except collecting capital. They like to say otherwise, and they'll talk about benevolent capitalism. But their benevolence usually only comes when they feel threatened by social movements or are so powerful they can afford to throw us some crumbs. When there are no unions, or relatively weak union movements, capitalists display their naked greed and crow about their excess profits as if it's good for us, the working class. And then their representatives in the body politic, often called the executive and congressional bodies, proceed to do whatever they have to do to echo the line of capitalism, explaining, if we don't let them have more money, how could they ever create the jobs we need? Well, I'm here to tell you that that's a crock of shit. Coal did not come out of the ground because Frick and Carnegie and other rich bastards dug it up. We and our ancestors pulled it out of the ground. Steel was not poured by Frick and Carnegie, it was poured by us and our ancestors. Soldiers didn't choose to go to war and die, and so continue to die today with the modern-day Frick's and Carnegies standing by their sides. And none of their relatives there with us either. We are alone without a single representative of the capitalist class sharing that awful burden. Capitalism, the accumulation of capital, the hoarding of money and assets, is designed for only one thing, and that is to always accumulate more by exploiting others. It is a vicious, ugly, parasitical system that can only be answered by those who are exploited, creating our own organizations to fight back, demand human rights and equality, and take power from those who have it. We create unions, we should create unions to do exactly that. We should not create unions just to fight for a small group of workers, but for all workers. For all those who are not counted as being part of the exploiting class, the ruling class, the capitalist class, whatever term you want to use. Capital has not and never will give up its power. It must be taken from them, and it must be taken with the same fervor, dedication, solidarity, and philosophy that their class practices, and that's by any means necessary. It's not easy, it never was easy, it never will be easy. But creating unions that speak for us, represent us, unions that are democratic and controlled by us, unions that truly seek to represent all those outside of the capitalist class are key to our survival and will remain key to creating a world that truly has the possibility of allowing the human race to live in peace and with justice for all. Our sheer numbers give us the potential and strength to do that. And if we truly seek to make a better world, we will never give up on that dream. And always remember that together we can move mountains, and alone we can't move at all.